All right.
Oh, all right. Creon, lovely to chat online.
Yeah.
So I'm doing this new podcast on interesting people. We've known each other for a while. You are definitely an interesting person. So why don't we start out just you telling us a little bit about yourself, either about how you grew up and or maybe a little bit about really interested in education. So how
All
you've
right.
kind of educated yourself.
Sure. So I grew up a while ago. I was born in the 1960s, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago. And after a few years in public school, the school got too rough for my parents to want me to continue there. And so rough meaning dangerous. And so uh, I got enrolled in what was my first real amazing educational experience, which was the University of Chicago Laboratory School. So the University of Chicago still to this day runs a K through 12 school as part of their graduate education program, but also as a private school that they for gifted kids and they make money off of it. And so I got accepted into this program and spent a few years there. And that was very nice because the school is housed at the university in the some of the old university buildings. And so you get to like be part of this university, like amidst all the Ivy League stuff, and like we would have our science classes in the old science labs of the university with all the oak cabinets with the taxidermied animals and the electrostatic machinery, and because the real scientists had moved to their new modern buildings. And so we got to experience this kind of deep history. And we had like access, we saw all these different things at the university. Like I saw my first computer, which was a mainframe, when I was 8 years old, and got to play with it. And and we would have our band and orchestra practice in the university music building. And so us little kids would be waiting outside the room, and then the university orchestra would be practicing, and they'd come filing out, and we'd go filing in and do our thing. So it was a really delightful and enriching opportunity, and with some special teachers and special activities that I sort of gravitated towards. We dissected a cat in fourth grade under the supervision, was done by the biology teacher, and we worked on the calculators and all this kind of early technology, and it was just amazing. And then I went to a big suburban public high school, some people have heard of, called New Trier, and I got to be in my last 3 years. I was in an alternative program inside this big high school where we made our own classes and did our own independent studies, and kind of had a whole strange mix of burnouts and hippies and overachievers and various people who, for one reason or another, wanted some kinds of high school that was not so standard. And now I can't see you anymore. Whatever.
Oh
Anyway,
no, sorry about that. Sorry about
okay.
that. Keep,
And then after that, I went to a traditional engineering school, Washington University, St. Louis, majored in mathematics and computer science. That was quite nice. And then
actually at that college, was it mostly science and math, or did they do everything there?
no, it's a full on, large kind of Ivy League style school that it had a medical school, a law school, a school of, liberal arts schools, fine arts schools, architecture school, and science and engineering schools. So all these things. And I was fortunate enough that I placed out of a lot of early classes in science and math. And so what happened was I completed all my graduation requirements uh, kind of in my junior year, and hence my last part of my junior year and my senior year, I pretty much got to just take whatever I wanted. And I realized that what I wanted to take, or what I was drawn to, was like not just only more math and science, but I took like art history and literature and music and these things, which completely expanded my mind and were arguably the most valuable classes I took in college. Because to this day, like, you study art history, it doesn't like get obsolete. You study computer science, and my curriculum back then is very different than what it is today. And um, I've had to keep up. But in something like music history or art history or literature, like it's more classic, and it's not only more
More
last,
timeless.
it's more timeless, and it's also, what I learned was something very interesting. This was explained to me by one of my professors, my art history professor. So my art history class was this huge class, a year long, really intense, big lecture hall, very intense homework load. And and I was one of the few upperclassmen in that class. It was full of all these liberal arts majors who had to take Introduction to Art History as, one of their first required classes. And I was an upperclassman in there optionally. And I got so much out of it, I think, compared to the rest of these guys. And I asked the professor about this, and he said, as far as I'm concerned, your strategy that you stumbled upon is the correct strategy. The standard educational strategy is you take all these general classes when you're a freshman and sophomore, and then you take specialized classes as an upperclassman. But he says that's the wrong way to do it. You should take specialized classes at first, and then you should take these generalized classes, which tie it all together. And so that was what I did inadvertently, and that was really great. And then I was going to stay for grad school. I'd started taking grad school classes in computer science at WashU, and I was doing these test job interviews with these various headhunters that came through the engineering school looking to hire fresh outs. And one of them, I did 3 or 4, but one of them was NASA. And I was like, oh my God, I've always wanted to work for NASA, but this was back in the day when NASA was kind of in a doldrum. And so I went and I interviewed with this NASA HR people who were going around recruiting, and they were interviewing. One of the projects they were interviewing for was, strangely enough, a project that I had already done an independent study project about, a special computer system that NASA was building to do fluid dynamics studies, and so I knew way more about this thing than the people who were coming to interview me. And in fact, I'd read all the papers by this team from NASA, and so I never met them, but I knew all this stuff about this project. So they flew me out to the Bay Area, to NASA Ames. I interviewed with these people. We hit it off. They made me a job offer. I terminated my grad school, went out to NASA, took this job. This was in the early 80s. And I stayed at NASA Ames for 32 years, doing all kinds of different things, starting with computer stuff, like even just writing device drivers and networking stuff, and then moving into writing actual simulation codes with people who knew how to do this, special simulation codes for these big computers, and graphics programs for these big computers that allowed us to visualize these complex flow fields that we were calculating. And then I moved from there to like quantum mechanics and molecular physics simulations, again with specialists, but I was a specialist in programming and visualization. So eventually I became a specialist in these kinds of computations too. And then I moved into more classic aerospace stuff like satellite system design and optics and RF. And then
let me just jump in there. So with NASA, you said it was in the doldrums. Was that because of the Challenger, or what
no,
put it in the doldrums?
Challenger happened shortly after I was hired, and that was
like, oh my God,
a big blow. Yeah. But no, NASA was in the doldrums post Apollo, because they'd been cut back, and they were kind of not really sure what their mission was, and they were kind of branching out in a whole bunch of different directions and not really excelling. And well, that's not entirely true. That's unfair. But they had lost a certain amount of focus and drive and resources. And so,
to be fair, from after Apollo, you got nowhere to go but down, right? Like,
well, that's not necessarily true, but that's was arguably what was the zeitgeist. And so, So, I mean, we did a lot of great stuff during that time, like deep space missions and Earth observation missions and stuff like that.
Oh, I think this is the part where Creon satellite goes out for a little bit. Okay.
Okay. So how am I now?
You're good.
Okay. So then around, let's see, what is it? 2024. So around 2008, 2009, there was a new director put in charge of all of NASA, and he was a very amazing guy, and he appointed new directors for most of the NASA centers, like Ames Research Center and Kennedy Space Center and Johnson Center, Space Flight Center, and Houston and all these places. And
is this Michael Griffin?
Mike Griffin is the guy who was eventually appointed by Obama, because the president appoints the director of NASA if they want to, but they usually don't get around to it for like a year, because it's just not as important as like the Secretary of State and all these other cabinet positions and stuff like that. And so eventually Obama appointed Mike Griffin. I think it was Obama. And Mike Griffin was a real change agent. And positive in most regards, and a very educated man. And he had like 5 graduate degrees or something ridiculous like that. And Mike Griffin appointed Pete Worden to lead NASA Ames. And so Pete Worden came in, and I was in a strange position at that time where I was like invited to the executive committee of NASA just because I was substituting for my boss who was out. And so I got to experience Pete Worden firsthand, and he was also a disruptor and a very educated man. He was a professor of astrophysics and a former Air Force general, and he was interested in all this new stuff. And he had brought with him a whole entourage of people that he had collected throughout his career. And when he was appointed the director of NASA Ames, he said to this entourage, "Look, you guys, now's our chance. Like, come work for me at NASA Ames, but like all 20 of you or however many you could get, and we will revolutionize NASA." Because
like a startup. It's like a startup, right? You bring all your people.
Right. So he brought these people, and I became friends with them because they were the most interesting thing going on after like 20 plus years of like business as usual there. And so I kind of inculcated myself into this inner group, and I ended up working directly for Pete Worden for a number of years as his special assistant, which basically meant I get to travel with him around the world and make presentations for him and try to bend his ear and pick his brain. And then I was living at this community house in Cupertino with a bunch of these people, not with Pete, but with a bunch of the kids. They were kids back then. Now they're not. And because this was 20 years ago. And this community house was an amazing thing. It's written about in Ashley Vance's book, When the Heavens Went on Sale. It's called Rainbow Mansion, and there's a lot about Rainbow Mansion in that book. And anyway, we all just started being family basically, and then several in the garage, like in the archetypal garage in Silicon Valley at this community house, Rainbow Mansion, several of my NASA colleagues who I actually shared an office with and who Pete Worden had brought in, they started building a CubeSat in the garage, and they came up with an idea for a mission, and they had some entree into some VC people, and they got some funding. So they quit NASA, formed Planet Labs, which was not called Planet Labs at first. It was called Cosmogia, but they changed the name fairly soon. And they
better name choice.
Name choice for sure. They wanted to build a large constellation of these very cheap satellites instead of a single giant expensive satellite. And they wanted to iterate quickly, launch stuff, see if it worked, kind of do a sort of rapid prototyping approach to satellite imaging hardware. And so then they spun out, quit NASA, became a private company. I waited for like 2 years or so before I left NASA to join them for personal reasons, but I was consulting with them, kind of, or helping them along the way. And eventually I left NASA, went to Planet Labs full time, where I now I've been there over 8 years, and I'm now the chief technologist, director of R&D, and a so-called Planet Fellow. And so I kind of get to do what I want, but it's really great. And we recently launched our first really kind of, for us, quite large, complicated satellite called Pelican, which was the thing that I was sort of the instigator of. And it has a whole interesting story on its own, but it's more ambitious than anything we've done before. And so the first one is up there now, kind of being commissioned and debugged and all
did that go up with SpaceX, or who brought it up?
Yeah. We used to launch with everybody except the Chinese, who we were prohibited from launching with. And but we would launch with the Europeans, the Japanese, the Russians a lot on Soyuz, other US launch providers, and SpaceX. But SpaceX has now, become the Indians. We launched with the Indian rockets a number of times. They're a good launch provider, but SpaceX has now pretty much dominates the market because of their low pricing and their frequent launch opportunities. And so I would say our last 10 to 12 or 20 launches have all been SpaceX, and there's really no reason at this point for us to launch with anyone else. Once SpaceX kind of made a commitment to mixed payloads with smaller satellites. Yeah. Oh shit. I'm sorry for the interruptions. Just one quick sec. Sorry.
No, you're still good. Oh yeah,
Um,
you go for it.
just a sec. Just a
Oh,
sec.
I'm an editor. Pull it out. No rush.
Well, okay, that's it. All right, so done with that. I hope.
Cool.
Let me put on do not disturb so that this can stop.
Don't worry, I can edit all this out anyway, so it's pretty easy.
All right. I've got it on. Okay, do not disturb is on for an hour. Okay. So anyway, so yeah, so that's kind of where it's at right now. Nowadays, the last thing I'll say is that nowadays, I recently pivoted after 7+ years at Planet doing basically spacecraft systems engineering and optical payload engineering to I got put in charge of our AI R&D group, and we've recently made, I can't talk that much about this, but we've recently made some really astonishing progress in using AI to analyze our imagery. So the thing about Planet Labs is at first we thought we were a satellite company building and launching satellites, but then we realized, no, we're a data company. We build and launch satellites, which costs a lot of money. And then make money, you sell the data from the satellites. So we now sell data, but the problem is we download so many images, like millions of images per day. It's actually like no one's actually going to look at all this data. I mean, maybe if they're interested in a very tiny piece of the earth, they will, but in general, no one's going to look every day at, hundreds of images. So we, and a lot of other people are interested in leveraging AI to do some kind of filtering, analysis, content extraction from these images. And so we're doing some really cool work on that right now, and hopefully we'll have something to share more publicly in the not too
Yeah, I'll have to bug you again when that happens. I mean, yeah, that sounds awesome. So and I should mention we met at Planet Labs, so that's where I know you in person from that, and just
right.
the general San Francisco scene.
Right. So you worked there, and how long? What years?
About 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. So one more thing I want to mention, which might segue us into one of our additional topics in this conversation, is while I was working for Planet, maybe about 5 years ago, after getting really interested in health and nutrition and sort of upgrading my health using some of these semi-heretical but ever more popular ideas, carbohydrate restriction, intermittent fasting, other kinds of restriction, carnivore, all these kinds of things. I became interested. That naturally led me into what's wrong with our food system, and as well as what's wrong with our medical system. But what's wrong with our food system kind of led me into the idea of regenerative agriculture, which I became obsessed with. And what I realized was that that was a way to combine my personal interests in health and nutrition and food with Planet Labs, because a lot of our customers are agricultural customers. And I'm like, okay, so how can we help move the needle on regenerative agriculture rather than just serving these agro giants and insurance companies and monocrop industrial companies, but like try and help smaller farmers and farmers who are trying to work out how to profitably and sort of sustainably do regenerative practices.
So actually, I can't even, I couldn't, if someone asked me, I couldn't define regenerative agriculture. So I'm curious if you could start there. Like when we say regenerative agriculture, like what's going on here?
Well, regenerative agriculture is a step beyond this this sort of meme or whatever you want to call it, this idea that everyone tosses around. They talk about sustainable this, sustainable that, sustainable energy, sustainable food system, but regenerative is like saying sustainable is not enough. Like we can't just sustain. We have to actually improve, because we've screwed up a lot of stuff. We've screwed up our soils. We've screwed up our food system. We've screwed up our health with the kind of pure focus on industrial, high input, energy intensive, chemical intensive farming, and well, not just farming, agriculture, which includes farming and ranching and related things. And so we need to figure out how to actually make this a system that improves the biosphere and improves human health and improves the soil, rather than one that is extracting natural capital from the soil and from the biosphere and damaging human health in the name of, just more calories and more profits. And so regenerative agriculture, at the next level down, is not easy to define. And one of the reasons is, although there are some fairly generally applicable principles, one of the things about regenerative agriculture that's fundamental is that it is locally tailored to the individual ecology, economy, the level of education and skills, the cost of labor versus the cost of good inputs, the infrastructure, and the needs and desires of the population. Like, all these things modulate what regenerative agriculture means for a given place at a given time. But in general, it revolves around agricultural practices, both farming and ranching, that improve the soil without a lot of artificial capital intensive inputs.
That makes sense. I mean, I suppose we're both on the same page that it's good that we've fed so many people in the world. Now the question is how do we do it in a way that is actual healthy food, right? Like, we've made some sacrifices to get to 8 billion people. Can we get to the point now to kind of undo the damage that we've done to get here, and potentially have healthier humans?
Yeah,
healthier planet,
healthier humans, healthier animals, healthier soil, healthier farm economy. All these things need to be fixed. And fortunately, there's kind of a set of core principles that can fix them all to a large extent. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive or contradictory or in conflict. So, this is not to say that it's easy or a panacea or, without its costs and risks, but in the long run, I think it's the only way to go. And I gotta also stress that regenerative agriculture doesn't solely mean like back to ancestral wisdom and the old ways. Like, it's actually a synthesis of what we know now about biology, ecology, soil science, economics, agricultural practices. It's a synthesis of even technology and AI and satellite imaging and traditional knowledge before it's lost. What have these cultures done that have sustained them for hundreds and hundreds of years without necessarily ruining their soil or ruining their health? Like, there were some very healthy traditional cultures. There's a few still left, but there used to be a number of them. And a lot of times their health took a nosedive with the introduction of, sugar and flour and industrial commodity products that replaced their own traditional ways. But so there's a synthesis we can make between high tech and traditional wisdom that creates an optimal solution that is better pretty much across the board. It's going to be better for everybody except for the big ag chemical companies and the big mega farm owners.
Oh, cool. Sorry, my wife's dropping by. Hey, I'm doing a little recording with Creon. So yeah, we're recording you.
You're so cute.
I'm gonna have to edit that out.
I don't know. That's nice.
Cool. No, that is pretty nice. Maybe we'll leave it in. Yeah, man. This makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's hard to imagine how the level of autoimmune conditions that we see in the world could have existed in older societies, right? Like,
well, they didn't.
It's right. They would be dead.
Hard to imagine. It's like there's no need to imagine it. It didn't exist, and everything all of a sudden, as RFK talks about and others, like, it all took off in like the early '80s or the mid '80s. Yeah. Like, all these diseases that no one used to have, allergies, autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, behavioral diseases.
I don't know if you've been following, but the rate of cancer in young kids is now skyrocketing. So
that's a more recent thing, and that's a more controversial.
Yeah.
But all these things started taking off around the same time, and the question is, you know, can we unravel the causes and what are they? But no, a lot of these diseases, including heart disease, dementia, all these things, they were like not present in traditional societies. I mean, essentially not present. It's not like they were 100% not present, but now they're all skyrocketing, and it's like worldwide, and it's like, what's going on? And uh, as again, as RFK, who I'm pretty enthusiastic about, says, it's like, if he was elected, like, it's time to stop the CDC and the NIH and all these people from working on communicable diseases. Like, we've kind of got those mostly under control, and they need to start looking at chronic diseases. And them and the EPA, they need to figure out what is causing this explosion in chronic disease. And he's not claiming that he knows, but you can list like a dozen things which changed around that time period, various chemicals, various medicines, various practices, various other external things. And, we don't know which, if any, and what combination have caused this disease burden to increase. But we better figure it out, because it's going to just bankrupt societies left and right, because this train of chronic disease is, going to bankrupt our healthcare and our Social Security and our Medicare, but it's also going to, reduce the productive population.
I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, today what brought up this conversation is I linked an article about chlormequat in food and urine from adults in the United States, which I suppose is
there's like hundreds of these compounds that have been just I wouldn't say I mean, they're expensive, so people, if they can, don't overuse them, but they are overused, and there's all sorts of these ones that have been being added and added and added, along with medicines, along with procedures, along with other external things, you name it, cell phone screen time, LED lighting, whatever,
it's a big thing. I mean, so let's kind of, I think we both kind of agree there's this chemical thing on the negative side, but I'm curious about kind of the other side of this, the positive side on the food. Like, I'm just curious. I mean, feel free to be anecdotal and kind of share your experience about, potentially what other diets have worked well for you. I mean, I think that.
Okay, sure. I'll tell you my personal experience, and then I'll tell you some, conjectures, extrapolation, and big guesses. So I was in my 50s some time ago, and well, not that long ago actually, but I was in my early 50s, so that was a little while ago, and I was not looking good. My dad had just died from diabetes related complications, so I got interested in that, and my blood markers and my weight and my various sort of macro aspects of my health were not looking good. They were going in the direction of obesity, diabetes, and various cardiovascular indicators. And so I became really interested in if there was a way to effectively reverse these conditions without a bunch of dubious, expensive, risky medical interventions. And I discovered the low carb idea. I discovered it actually through Peter Attia, who gave a TED talk like 10 plus years ago. That's really an amazing talk called "What If We're Wrong About Diabetes?" And since that time, I've become a little less enamored of Peter Attia, but I've listened to a lot of his stuff over the years, although not recently. And so I started with the support of my wife, who joined me in this ketogenic, carb restricted modality of eating. I just tried cutting out carbs and increasing fat, and then eventually I went to time restricted eating. So I would only eat between 12 noon and 8 p.m. approximately. So skip breakfast and no late snacks, and low carb. And then I realized that I could eat as much as I wanted, as long as I kept these basic protocols: carbohydrate restriction and intermittent fasting, and occasional longer fasts. Like when I go to a festival or something, then we've met each other, or when I go to one of these festivals, I tend to just fast by and large. And the reason is, well, there's various other things you do at festivals that are arguably more predictable on an empty stomach. And then also like fasting for a few days once or more a year is arguably a good idea. And then the other thing is that like these, who wants to spend time in those porta potties, you know? And if
Right.
you kind of avoid them. So that's all good. And so anyway, I brought everything back in line. Like I lost 40 pounds fairly quickly. And again, no exercising, no significant workout schedule, no significant caloric restriction. Like I ate as many calories as I wanted, as long as they were fat and protein in between the hours of 12 and 8. And I brought my weight down. I brought my blood lipids all down. I brought my blood glucose and various other markers, insulin, hemoglobin A1C, C-reactive protein, all these various things that you can get tested for a few bucks. I brought them all back in line. I wore a continuous glucose monitor for a while, which is a fun thing to play with here into quantified self. And if you want to figure out what carbs you can eat without spiking your glucose, you need a continuous glucose monitor is the thing to do. Any doctor who's worth paying will prescribe you one of these things because they're just a diagnostic test that you buy and wear. Anyway, so yeah, I got my health kind of back in shape. I lost a lot of fat. I gained muscle without a lot of working out. And I learned a ton. And so I've been refining that over the years and still very happy with it, still practicing it. You know, occasionally you have a cheat day, that's fine. But I never eat sugar in any significant quantity, including fructose and other sugars. And so I've been completely happy with what that's done for me. I've turned a lot of my friends onto it. I've turned their health around. You know, it's not for everybody. Like some people, you know, people are different and they have different tastes and they have different goals and they have different metabolisms and genetics. But by and large, especially for like middle-aged men, but not exclusively, like this is the thing to do before you go and get
Statins,
Ozempic, you know, blah, 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 blah. Like all that stuff is arguably does more harm than good and makes a lot less money for the pharma companies. But if you just restrict carbs, which are not essential, nobody needs carbs pretty much. Like you synthesize all the carbs you need if you have enough fat and protein. Carbohydrates are not an essential macronutrient, but fat and protein are. And you need your essential amino acids, which you get from protein.
But I thought like, aren't oats, full grain oats, aren't these good for you, for your heart or something like that? What am I supposed to think about the oats?
Well, I think we already had the oats discussion briefly online. So yeah, I'm really down on grains and oats and fiber and even plants. Not that I think that no one should eat plants ever, although some people do a carnivore diet and do extremely well on it. I'm very in favor of people who are unwell, whether that's food allergies, autoimmune problems, obesity, bad blood glucose, whatever. I'm very in favor of people who are unwell going on a super restricted elimination diet. And I personally, my general approach, although it may vary, would be, and I'm not a doctor, so this is just what I've found, is like start with bone broth and nothing else. Add in, and if that's cool with you, it feels okay, add in eggs and meat, ideally fresh, like grass-raised eggs and meat, local. And then if that works okay, you can add in some plants if you want to that are sort of more benign, like green leafy vegetables and non-starchy vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower if you can handle it. But I see no reason for humans to eat grains or even very many fruits, except for occasionally, because we evolved. I mean, we kind of evolved to some extent through these ice age bottlenecks. And as we mentioned online, during those times, there was no plants, there was no fruit. What there were was large game animals with a lot of fat that if you had your act together as a tribe, you could slaughter them and they'd provide food for the tribe for weeks, you know. And then there were times when there even wasn't any of those and you just had to live off your own fat. These days that never happens. Like the hunt always goes well when you go down to the supermarket. Like you never come back empty-handed. You can get as many fruits as you want to with as much sugar as you want year round, you know, and most of the stuff is full of toxins and chemicals, even if it's from the edges of the supermarket where the actual food is kept, which doesn't need ingredients list because it's like a broccoli or steak. Doesn't need an ingredients list. Anyway, if you go in the middle of the supermarket, everything is in a package and has a big list of ingredients. And it's like, that is like a pretty good sign that it's not food. It's some industrial product that is being marketed as food, but it's actually just kind of waste and is packaged as food. Thank God they still have to put the ingredients on it. They don't have to put the quantities, but they have to list them in the order, I think, by mass. Presumably the food companies are busy trying to undo that, but hopefully that will never happen. If they could get away with not putting the ingredients on these things, you know, of course that's what they would do. But like, basically, if you eliminate all so-called foods from your diet that have more than 2 ingredients on the label, if they have a label at all, then you're good. Like tuna and olive oil, like that's food, you know. A box of crackers, which has like 30 ingredients on the list, that's not food. That's just food residue that's been ground up and mixed with chemicals to keep it from rotting. And by the way, this is another thing. It's like, if you think about it, all these things that we do to flour and processed food and various things, by and large, the things we do to make them shelf stable, it's like, you got to think about it. So what does shelf stable mean? It means that like no insects, rodents, you know, or even microorganisms will eat this stuff. Like they know it's toxic. They they don't bother eating it, but that means it's shelf stable, you know? And so it's like, it doesn't oxidize because it's like pre-oxidized. It's just awful. And this stuff is being foisted on the American people and the world people. And it's being foisted through these words like whole grain, you know, natural, heart healthy, all this stuff, which are either outright lies, like heart healthy, like they still say low fat is heart healthy. And that's been totally disproven, like thoroughly disproven. Yep. And they try to say that polyunsaturated fats are healthier than saturated fats, totally disproven, complete lies. And I can send you all kinds of summary resources on that, because I've published some documents that basically annotated bibliographies about these misinformations. And the other lies are like, you know, sugar, like high carb is good, high fat is bad, total lie. It just goes on and on. Or that, like, as more to the point of the discussions we were having, like there's all these people who believe that soy is healthy, oats are healthy, you know, almond milk is healthy, soy milk is healthy. It's like, no, it's not. This stuff is all basically poison that's being marketed to you because it's profitable. It's super cheap for them to make. They make people think it's healthy. And then all these people are whining and moaning about IBS and, you know, food allergies and this and that. And it's like, yeah, that's because what you're eating is toxic. Stop everything. Stop all products that come in boxes. Stop all, unless it's maybe bone broth. Stop, but better to make it yourself. Stop all stuff that has ingredients lists and just go back to real food. And by real food, I don't mean what they say is real food on a box or sold at a store called Real Foods. I mean the thing that is like food that your ancestors would have recognized. Like they would have recognized a carrot, even a potato, you know, they might recognize a piece of fruit, although it would probably astonish them. Like, what is this cartoon fruit? Like puffed up and full of water and, you know, no nutrients. Like, and you know, eat real food. This is where I differ from Michael Pollan, who used to say, eat real food, mostly plants, not too much. And he's totally wrong. Eat real food, mostly meat, as much as you want. Like that's right. The basic formula for most people. And to make them healthy, not all people, but like all these people who whine about their gut and their skin and their, you know, brain fog, their energy levels, their long COVID, you name it. It's like, yeah, that's because you're poisoning yourself and you're enriching these criminal companies who've been criminally convicted many times of all kinds of foisting, you know, toxins.
And to be fair, doing experiments in this space is very difficult, right? Like trying to do experiments within the realm with a decent control in the realm of
Well,
food
okay. I
is
mean,
so difficult.
you can't really, it's hard to do a control if you're experimenting on yourself. Like you can't split
Right.
into, but you can try something for 6 weeks and see how you feel. And that's, and what I would recommend is, total elimination diet down to bone broth, slowly adding in eggs and meat, and like slowly add things in, like every few weeks, add a new thing. And then check, because sometimes you'll add in a new thing and your health will just tank for a couple of weeks. And then it's like immediately remove that thing, get back to baseline, and then maybe add in something else or don't. That's my recommendation for most people. And by the way, bone broth, which I'm super interested in, there's a really great book on broth called Nourishing Broth by Sally Fallon, who's written a number of great books on nutrition, not on nutrition, on traditional diets. And you can totally make your own bone broth. Like I have almost started to default to some extent for a significant fraction of my meals to the following. I go to the store, I get a cooked rotisserie chicken. It's got one ingredient, it's got like 3 ingredients: chicken, salt, herbs, and I bring it home. I cut off the meat, pack it in the fridge, take all the bones and skin, throw it into a bag, maybe get some chicken livers or some chicken feet, throw them into the bag. When the bag is kind of full, I stick it in my Instant Pot. I pressure cook it for 2 hours with maybe some salt and some herbs. I strain the broth into a container, and now I've got the most nourishing, healthy, tasty thing. And by the way, you can reduce it down and make sauces, and you can do all these things with it. You can add stuff back in to make soup rather than broth. But it's like, anecdotally, my wife and I, like, whenever we feel sick, we just do the like Jewish penicillin. We eat the chicken soup and we're good. Like, it's amazing. Her health has been completely transformed through this kind of elimination diet. She used to be your typical bloating, skin rashes, sleeping a lot. And now she's like super energetic, no rashes, no bloating, no trouble. And it's because of the elimination diet, and particularly the elimination. And by the way, back to oats, like high fiber is another bullshit thing. There's no good evidence that I've been able to find that fiber is good for you. There's no good evidence that a lot of fruit is good for you. There's no good evidence, in my opinion, that meat is bad for you, particularly if it's not from a factory farm.
I think nitrites they've been able to show have serious
but
sodium nitrites.
Nitrites are not part of meat. Nitrites are part of certain preserved meats. Like, again, it's done to increase the shelf life. But there's other ways to increase the shelf life of meat. Like you can just dry it out and make jerky. It doesn't require nitrites. It's not going to spoil. Like the nitrites I'm not sure why they're added, but they're probably not great for people. But who's going to, like, most people aren't going to eat a diet consisting just of, Slim Jims or something like this. Like that's kind of dubious. They're full of shit. Well,
yeah, I think one of the studies I showed was that one of the big confounds with the meat studies was smoking. That when they've done kind of retrospective diets with meats,
that sounds kind of questionable to me because why? Because are you there? Yeah, there you are.
Oh, I'm here. Yeah.
Sounds smoking is something that, look, nutritional studies, particularly based on food questionnaires, are notoriously unreliable. I mean, you ask people how much of this or that they eat, and they either can't recall, or they make shit up, or they think they don't want to look bad. So they're like, oh no, I don't eat a lot of sugar. I don't drink a lot of alcohol, right? I don't smoke very much. And it's like, they're not necessarily telling the truth, even to themselves. And so, but I find it hard to believe that they would just forget to try and adjust for smoking. Although it may be that they did adjust for smoking and they found that smoking plus meat is like worse than just smoking or just meat. That could be, but nicotine is not bad for you. Cigarette smoke is bad for you, but nicotine is arguably good for you, which is why one of the reasons I do.
Yeah, have you? I'm actually curious about that. So, Isn't it carcinogen? Isn't it in that?
Not clear. No, I don't think there's very good evidence that nicotine is a carcinogen. Now, the propylene glycol that's in here, TBD, if the Chinese are all poisoning us with these vapes, we'll see. But no, nicotine is a cognitive enhancer, a metabolic enhancer. It promotes a thing called mitochondrial uncoupling, which a lot of things promote, like sunlight and hot heat therapy and exercise and carbohydrate restriction and fasting. They all promote mitochondrial uncoupling, which is the thing you want to get to. Like, the thing you want to get to is a metabolic state most of the time where you're in a state which is called mitochondrial uncoupling. And that's where you're basically burning fat and producing heat and not burning glucose and producing blood sugar excursions. And mitochondrial uncoupling apparently is sort of the master switch that accounts for a lot of the beneficial effects of these various things like fasting and carbohydrate restriction and exercise and sunlight. And nicotine also promotes mitochondrial uncoupling, as does melatonin and as does certain other things. It's at least in animal models.
Let me put you on pause. Just want to make sure that you're good on time.
Well, technically, let's say we have another 15 minutes because I need to make some food and then go to a meeting at 12:30 at 1
Okay,
o'clock.
cool. Thank you. Yeah, perfect.
So anyway,
mitochondrial coupling is this different than ketosis? This is two different things.
Ketosis is associated with mitochondrial uncoupling, but ketosis is a state technically of your blood, I believe. Like, if you have a certain level of ketones in your blood and a certain low level of glucose, you're in ketosis almost certainly. But mitochondrial uncoupling is another level in metabolic complexity, and it's not something that, as far as I know, you can directly measure, at least not easily. But your thing is like you're bouncing. It's very strange.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it's a thing, and you can read about it. I can send you some resources on that. I'll send you a couple docs that talk about a lot of this stuff, and you can search for those words. Yeah, so I'm excited about that. And I tell you, subjectively, I'm pretty sure that a couple of years ago, I entered a state of very frequent, if not almost constant, mitochondrial uncoupling. And here's one of the things I noticed. I'm in my 60s, and I go and party with people in their 20s and 30s and early 40s all the time. And I was out at a party. This was when it really hit me. I was out at a thing on Catalina Island with a bunch of friends, and we had come on a yacht, and the party kind of went off the rails a little bit, like the logistics weren't that seamlessly handled. And so, the food was late and there wasn't enough, and it got cold, and so everyone was waiting on this dock to get a water taxi back to the yacht, and it was a huge line, and people were waiting. We were all waiting for like an hour and a half or so, and I was there in a t-shirt, and my friends were all dressed in their Burning Man furs and this kind of thing, and they're all these young friends are like whining. They're hungry, they're tired, they're cold, they're scared, and I'm like, I'm here in my t-shirt. I'm 25 years older than all of you. I'm fine. I haven't eaten. Yeah. I'm hungry. I'm not cold. I'm not fearful. I'm not, whining. Like, what is wrong with you guys? And what I realized is not so much that there's something wrong with them. It's that I'm in this warrior state where I'm burning my fat, producing heat, producing ketones, short fatty acids, and to some extent glucose to fuel my body from my own metabolism. They get hungry. If they don't eat for 2 hours, they're quote unquote starving, which is like A, not true, and B, insulting to people who are actually starving. Like, you're not starving. You wouldn't be starving for 3 weeks if you stopped eating, but they never get into this mode because they never restrict carbs, they never fast. And so they're just stuck on this cycle of like, you eat carbs, you get a blood sugar spike, make insulin, you get a blood sugar crash, you feel low energy and you have a headache and you're tired and cranky, so you eat more carbs. And you got to get off that train.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because so many religious cultures have a tradition of fasting, right? Like, we know it's possible because most cultures have it.
Yeah, and the fact that most Westerners go around and whine after they haven't snacked for 2 hours that they're starving is just like you've been hooked by the machine to the glucose thing, and it's like you're killing yourself. And by the way, as you get sicker and sicker, they're going to get richer and richer, selling you insulin and selling you, all these various stents and statins and all this shit that's just going to make you sicker. Like, by the way, if you're getting diabetic and they put you on insulin, that's a death sentence.
Right.
That is a
Right.
death sentence. You will increase the insulin more and more and more. You'll burn out your pancreas more and more and more. You'll increase your insulin resistance more and more and more. And then you'll just die of organ failure. And they know this, but it's possible.
So this is one of those things because I tend to be very skeptical of evil cabals, right? Like just because I don't really believe that people are that confident. So
It's
like
not.
my
It's
my
not. It's not primarily an evil cabal. I agree with you there. It's not like there's a bunch of doctors and even pharma company people who want to just make people miserable and kill them. But they know which side their bread is buttered on. There's not a lot of money in telling people to not eat this, that, and the other thing, and recover their health through things that actually save them money. There's not a lot of money in that. There are a few 100,000 good doctors who are promoting this and getting amazing results, but uh, that's not the norm. And it's not like doctors are evil or even people who try and make biotech and pharma are evil. A few of them maybe, especially near the top, and they've been convicted of many evil things like this again and again. But no, it's just like it's a it's a it's a collective. It's what is the word? It's like a self-organizing problem that's due to some incentive structures that are arguably wrong and externalization of costs. Like to some extent, these places can do this because they don't bear the cost. Like if people are getting sick and healthcare costs are going up and people are getting less productive and more miserable, the medical industry and the pharma industry doesn't have to bear those costs. Those costs are borne by the taxpayer and the individuals themselves. So they don't have an incentive to rein those costs in and correct those problems. But it's not like they're necessarily they're not trying to be evil. They're just caught up in a system that is dysfunctional.
Yeah, and I think the question that I have, I'm a betting man. You're more of a scientist. The question I have is, we see the obesity in the Middle East, America, now London. We don't see it at the same degree in the European countries, right? We're starting to see it there, but
That's where you look. There's a lot of it in Italy. It's not universal, but as you may recall, like all those people who were dying of COVID in Italy early on, they were all morbidly obese, or most of them. And it's spreading to China, Japan, and China to a lesser extent, Japan, India. It's not very much in Africa, even though they've been kind of force-fed Western products to a certain extent, soda pop and refined flour and this sort of thing. But Africa had really great COVID outcomes, even though they were basically unvaccinated. And they just didn't. They get out in the sun more. They work harder. They physically they have more traditional diets still in place to some extent.
So if you had to bet though, I mean, like I'm not non-scientific here. What is it the bacteria sides? Is it the what do you think? What would you I think this goes back to the RFK thing. That
If I had to bet on what the cause is of all these chronic problems, my guess is it's multiple causes. My guess is that we can make a list of things, all of which either seem like based on some experience and some mechanistic insights are probably no good. We can also have a bunch of other things where we don't know, but it's hard to imagine how they would be good. Like a great example of that is, cell phone radiation. Like that's a controversial thing. Is that harmful or blind? Well, one thing you say is it's probably not good for you. Like we can at least agree on that. It's probably not good to have like a bunch of, gigahertz radiation beaming right into your brain or into your testes if you keep it in your pocket, right? And so, does that mean it's the major culprit? My guess would be probably not. But is it a suspect? Why not? Is it the only thing? Probably not. But there's like a dozen things. I mean, there's thousands of chemicals if you want to, like break them out. There's that one you were talking about. There's atrazine. There's, glyphosate. There's, you name it, neonicotinoids, all these different things that have been added into our food system, and are now our water system and our oceans and our soil and all that stuff.
The wild thing I found out about glyphosate is they don't just use it now as a bacteria pesticide, but also just to dry out crops. It's used as a way to
I thought it was basically an herbicide. Like I thought your idea is you get your glyphosate resistant soy that you've genetically engineered, then you spray glyphosate all over the soil, kill everything, and except for the plants that have the resistance, and then this is considered safe. And it's like,
well, that's true. But now what people do with their spare glyphosate is they actually, once you harvest, right, you spray the finished product with glyphosate just to dry it off.
It's like arguably like this hard to imagine how this could be a good idea. It might not be the smoking gun, it might not be the primal cause of all this stuff, but it's like, again, sort of with the idea of the elimination diet, like we should probably eliminate all this stuff to the extent we can, and then if we want to slowly add it back in one at a time and see how it affects people, fine.
Because it might be different from person to person, right? Like maybe some people do it better over here, some people do it.
Yeah, sure. And there are like pluses to these things. Like for instance, you could imagine, like this is, again, and we're going to have to end this soon. Like there are AI-based prototype farm equipment. Like they drive down the row, they have cameras, they see where there's a weed, they zap it with a little electrical spark. Like that seems like a much nicer way to get rid of weeds, if you indeed want to, than digging up the soil, poisoning it, and poisoning the food. And like we have to use some finesse.
Yeah, totally, man. Well, I want to finish this conversation with just kind of, you've had kind of an epic life, everything from this kind of history and growing up to NASA, I guess, I don't know, Planet Lab fellow, and now this interest in regenerative farming and all this stuff.
Regenerative ag.
Is it just
regenerative ag? Because ranching and grazing is a huge part of this, in my opinion.
Yeah. So
I'm curious. I just mentioned something here before we add more questions.
Yeah.
80% of the arable land in the world, meaning the land that is suitable for producing food, 80% of it is not suitable for farming and row crops. 80% of it is too stony, too hilly, too dry, or otherwise unsuitable for farming. But it is suitable for grazing. So the idea that cattle or other animals are taking away food crops is another lie. Like by and large, that's not the case. By and large, animals live off of foods. If they come from farmed areas at all, they're the stuff that humans won't eat. Corn cobs, silage, which is like waste leaves and stuff like that. Spoiled food, substandard stuff that can't make it to market. Like we feed that to the animals. No one in their right mind would feed high quality human food to animals. Now soy is a slight anomaly there we don't need to get into, but the point is that most of the land that is suitable for producing food in this world is only suitable for grazing animals, and it produces higher quality food at lower environmental impact if it's done correctly, meaning if they're correctly grazed, so they restore the soil rather than deplete it. And so anyway, ranching, grazing, animal agriculture is arguably the most important part of agriculture. I mean, you look at these countries, you look at Africa and other less developed places, someone's wealth is kind of measured in how many cows they have, and for a good reason.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there because you got to go. But man, this was awesome. Thank you so much it was a really interesting conversation, and I learned a lot. So it
was great fun. Let's do it again.
Let's do it again. Thanks, man.
Take care, my friend. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, and we'll just stop the conversation. Stop recording.